Ibrahim Traoré, the captain of Burkina Faso, symbolizes a dramatic shift in the geopolitical landscape of the Sahel. In 2022, his rise to power broke ties with the West, and in doing so, he became the figurehead of a broader trend in the region. Burkina Faso, along with Mali and Niger, has actively expelled foreign military forces, including the French, signaling a move towards sovereignty. The question no longer revolves around whether Africa can secure its autonomy, but how far this shift will extend in the years ahead. Ibrahim Traoré's leadership will define the next chapter for these nations in their struggle for independence. Ibrahim Traoré's leadership in Burkina Faso marks the beginning of a bold new chapter for the Sahel region. His decisive actions in expelling foreign military forces, including France, are not just symbolic but represent a fundamental shift in the region's sovereignty. Burkina Faso, alongside Mali and Niger, has chosen to reject the traditional post-colonial structures that have kept them dependent on Western powers for decades. This defiance is not just about rejecting foreign influence, it is about seizing control of their own future. The stakes are high. If these countries can successfully transition to self-sufficiency without falling into chaos, they will redefine Africa's relationship with the West. However, the path is fraught with risk. The instability that accompanies such a drastic shift in power dynamics could lead to further insecurity, both within the region and internationally. While the West may view these actions as a destabilizing force for Ibrahim Traoré and his allies, it is about creating a future where they are no longer at the mercy of external powers. This is a gamble that could change the course of history for Africa. In the heart of West Africa, a quiet revolution is unfolding. While many in the West focus on the immediate geopolitical shifts, the deeper story lies in the underlying frustration of the people of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. These nations, once firmly under the influence of Western powers, have decided to sever those ties, choosing instead to pursue a path of sovereignty and self-determination. This move was not sparked by a single event, but by years of growing discontent with foreign intervention, particularly French military presence, which had long been seen as a stabilizing force in the region. The decision to expel foreign troops and seek alternative alliances, such as those with Russia, has been framed as a necessary step towards securing national sovereignty. For Ibrahim Traoré, this shift represents not only a rejection of the past, but also an attempt to redefine the future. The military junta he leads has argued that the continuous presence of foreign forces has prevented these nations from fully controlling their own destinies. The insurgencies and terrorist groups that have plagued the region were seen as products of foreign policies that kept local governments dependent on outside support rather than fostering internal strength. By moving towards a self-sustained security model, these governments are betting on the idea that they can fight their own battles, with or without the West's approval. The agreement with Russia to provide military support, including mercenaries, drones, and weapons, has been a significant part of this strategy. Russia, in turn, has offered a different kind of partnership, one that does not come with political or economic conditions, a stark contrast to the West's model of aid. This new alliance, however, comes with its own set of risks. The question now is whether these nations can truly find stability through these new partnerships, or whether they will fall into the same traps that have ensnared their predecessors. For the people of these countries, the stakes are incredibly high. Should this bold experiment succeed, it could serve as a beacon for other African nations struggling with their own post-colonial legacies. But the path is uncertain, and the outcome will have lasting repercussions not just for the Sahel, but for the entire continent. Ibrahim Traoré's rise to power was not a simple military coup, but a response to the growing demands of his people for change. As a military officer with deep roots in Burkina Faso's security apparatus, Traoré saw firsthand the limitations of foreign intervention in his country's affairs. The West's presence, particularly that of France, was supposed to stabilize the region, but it often seemed to exacerbate the instability. The wave of military coups that swept through the Sahel, with Traoré's becoming the most recent, reflects the failure of the international model in addressing the root causes of unrest. What sets Traoré apart is his ability to navigate the complex political landscape of Burkina Faso. While many in the West view his actions with suspicion, particularly his alliance with Russia, he has garnered significant support at home. His promise to restore security, autonomy, and dignity resonates with a population tired of foreign control and the endless cycle of conflict. His leadership, though controversial, has provided a sense of direction for those who feel that traditional diplomacy and foreign assistance have failed them. The early impact of his leadership is visible. Within just a few months of taking power, Traoré expelled French forces and took steps to limit Western influence in key sectors. These actions have set a new course for Burkina Faso's foreign policy and military strategy. His leadership is not just about immediate change, but about establishing a long-term vision for a self-sufficient, independent Burkina Faso. The early steps, however, are fraught with challenges. The country faces ongoing insurgencies, economic instability, and the complicated task of building a security infrastructure without foreign help. As Burkina Faso and its neighbors seek to navigate their newfound autonomy, the world will be watching to see if Traoré's vision can deliver on its promises, or if it will unravel under the weight of external pressures and internal turmoil. The geopolitical landscape of the Sahel has undergone a profound transformation in recent years. What began as a series of isolated actions by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger has quickly escalated into a coordinated effort to break free from Western influence. In 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré took power in Burkina Faso, making it clear that his country's future would no longer be dictated by foreign powers. Traoré's decision to expel French troops was not a symbolic gesture, but a strategic move aimed at regaining sovereignty and shifting the balance of power in the region. In the wake of Traoré's ascent, Mali and Niger followed suit, expelling French forces and distancing themselves from Western military operations in the Sahel. This coordinated withdrawal marked a critical juncture in the region's history, signaling the end of the post-colonial security framework that had governed the Sahel for decades. The three nations, historically tied to France through military and economic agreements, were now seeking alternative partners, with Russia emerging as a key ally. The timing of these events is not coincidental. The Sahel has long been a hotspot for insurgent groups, and despite billions in foreign aid and military intervention, the situation has only worsened. The French-led counterterrorism operations, particularly Operation Barkhane, failed to bring a lasting peace to the region. The presence of foreign troops, rather than acting as a stabilizing force, often contributed to the perpetuation of violence and instability. For many in the Sahel, the West's promises of peace and security have proven hollow. The expulsion of foreign forces was only the beginning. The governments of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have set about restructuring their security models. Ibrahim Traoré has been a vocal proponent of a more independent, self-sufficient approach to combating terrorism and insurgency. The military coup in Burkina Faso was framed as an opportunity to restore the country's sovereignty and security without relying on Western intervention. Traoré's government has actively sought support from countries that are less concerned with political conditions and human rights criteria, something that Western powers have often demanded in exchange for military aid. Russia has been quick to offer its assistance, signing agreements with the three Sahelian countries to provide military support and equipment. This partnership is not just about weapons, it is about a comprehensive approach to security. Russia's military contractors, including the notorious Wagner Group, have been deployed to provide on-the-ground support for local forces. In return, these countries have pledged to align with Moscow's strategic interests in the region, including securing energy resources and opening up new markets for Russian companies. While the West has condemned these developments, labeling them as destabilizing, the governments of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger argue that they are simply asserting their right to self-determination. For these nations, the presence of Western troops was not an act of benevolence, but a symbol of neo-imperialism. The West's refusal to respect the sovereignty of African nations has left them with few choices but to seek alternative sources of support. The alliance with Russia, however, is not without its risks. The Sahel countries are walking a fine line, trying to balance their newfound autonomy with the need for external assistance. The region's instability is deeply rooted in complex historical, ethnic, and economic factors that cannot be easily overcome by foreign mercenaries or military contracts. The prospect of greater Russian influence raises concerns about the long-term consequences for governance in the Sahel. Some critics argue that Russia's involvement could exacerbate authoritarian tendencies and fuel internal conflicts, especially if its interests clash with local populations. As Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger forge ahead with their new security frameworks, the world will be watching closely. The success or failure of their efforts will have far-reaching implications, not just for the Sahel, but for the entire African continent. If these nations can stabilize their security without the help of the West, it will send a powerful message about the possibility of breaking free from the chains of post-colonial dependence. However, if their experiments in autonomy fail, it will serve as a cautionary tale for other African countries seeking to assert their independence in a world where foreign powers continue to hold significant sway. The coming years will be critical in determining whether the Sahel can truly redefine its future, or if it will fall back into the cycle of instability that has plagued the region for so long. The shift in the Sahel's geopolitical landscape is not merely theoretical, it is backed by concrete data and events that demonstrate the growing divergence between Western powers and the countries of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Over the past decade, the Sahel has seen a dramatic rise in violence, with insurgent groups, including Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates, claiming increasing territories. Despite billions in foreign aid and military presence, the region has remained mired in conflict. The military presence of France, which had been a cornerstone of Western strategy in the Sahel, failed to stabilize the region, prompting the governments of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to seek alternatives. One of the key indicators of the failure of the Western strategy is the rising number of violent attacks. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, ECLED, incidents of violence in the Sahel have surged dramatically in recent years, particularly after the height of French military operations. In 2020 alone, Burkina Faso saw a nearly 50% increase in violent events, with more than 1,000 civilians killed in insurgent attacks. The situation in Mali and Niger has followed a similar trajectory, with both countries experiencing record levels of violence despite the presence of foreign military forces. This surge in violence was exacerbated by the presence of foreign troops, particularly those from France. A report from the International Crisis Group, ICG, in 2021 highlighted that, despite French military operations such as Operation Barkhane, insurgent groups continued to grow in strength and numbers, creating a security vacuum in many parts of the region. The French approach, focused primarily on counter-terrorism operations, has been criticized for neglecting the root causes of instability, such as poverty, governance issues, and the lack of development in rural areas. In stark contrast, the decision of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to expel foreign troops and seek new alliances has been portrayed as a necessary response to this failure. The departure of French forces, though met with international condemnation, was seen as a symbolic victory for the region's sovereignty. Ibrahim Traoré, the leader of Burkina Faso, has been adamant that his country's future will not be shaped by foreign military forces. The rise of the Russian-backed security model, which includes military support from Wagner Group, mercenaries, and arms deals, is another crucial element of this shift. A key statistic that underscores this transformation is the agreement signed between Russia and Niger in 2024 to build weapons production facilities in the country. This deal, which is set to significantly increase Niger's military capabilities, is a direct challenge to the Western-dominated security framework in the Sahel. The establishment of domestic weapons production is a game changer for these nations, offering them greater autonomy and the ability to defend themselves without relying on foreign suppliers, who have often imposed political and economic conditions on arms deals. Moreover, this shift is not just about military power. Economic indicators show that the Sahel's traditional reliance on Western aid is also weakening. In 2023, for example, Burkina Faso signed a major infrastructure deal with Russia, bypassing Western-backed organizations and institutions. This move is part of a broader trend of seeking economic partnerships that do not come with the strings attached to Western aid, which often includes demands for democratic reforms and adherence to international human rights standards. However, this new alignment with Russia comes with its own set of challenges. While Russia's promises of support have been welcomed, the long-term sustainability of these alliances remains uncertain. Critics argue that Russia's involvement, though seemingly a counterpoint to Western imperialism, may lead to a different kind of dependency. The country's growing economic interests in the region, particularly in uranium and gold mining, raise questions about the true nature of Russia's role in the Sahel. Will the region be caught in a new cycle of external influence, this time under Moscow's control? Despite these uncertainties, the data shows a clear trend. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are actively distancing themselves from Western influence and taking steps toward a future where they can assert their sovereignty and autonomy. Whether this strategy will succeed or fail depends on the region's ability to stabilize politically and economically while managing its security challenges without relying on foreign military forces. The coming years will be crucial in determining whether this new model of self-sufficiency can deliver stability to the Sahel, or if the region will fall into further chaos with devastating consequences for the people living there. The shift in the Sahel, spearheaded by the actions of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, has sparked significant debate. Supporters of this move, including Ibrahim Traoré and his allies, argue that the withdrawal of foreign troops and the search for new strategic partnerships represent a much-needed assertion of national sovereignty. They contend that after decades of Western military presence, which has failed to stabilize the region, it is time for African nations to take control of their own security and development. The idea of self-determination resonates deeply, especially after the failures of international military interventions. On the other hand, critics of this realignment argue that the move away from Western influence could lead to greater instability in the region. The presence of foreign military forces, particularly French troops, has been a key part of counterterrorism efforts in the Sahel for years. While the results have been mixed, some analysts believe that the loss of Western support could lead to a vacuum that insurgent groups will readily exploit. The argument is that while the Sahel may reject Western intervention, it risks replacing one form of dependency with another, this time under Russia's growing influence. This criticism is not without merit. Russia's growing presence in the region, particularly through its partnership with Wagner Group mercenaries, raises concerns about the nature of this new alliance. While Russia offers military support without the political conditions that often come with Western aid, its involvement in Africa has typically been centered on securing economic interests, including access to valuable resources like uranium and gold. Critics argue that this new partnership may lead to a different form of exploitation, where Russia's economic and strategic interests take precedence over the sovereignty of Sahelian nations. Despite these concerns, the governments of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger maintain that they have no other choice but to forge new alliances. The West's failure to provide long-term security and development in the region has forced these countries to seek alternative paths. Russia, with its non-interventionist approach, has offered a compelling option, though it remains to be seen whether this shift will lead to sustainable stability or simply swap one external influence for another. The future of the Sahel hinges on how these nations balance their newfound autonomy with the need for external support. If the region can stabilize on its own, the move away from Western powers could serve as a model for other African nations seeking to break free from post-colonial dependence. However, if the region continues to face violence and instability, it will likely reaffirm the critics' concerns that the Sahel's quest for self-determination may come at too high a cost. The Sahel is at a crossroads, and the actions of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are reshaping the region's future. While the West warns of the dangers of this new alignment with Russia, there is a fundamental shift happening. The Sahel is taking control of its own destiny. The decision to expel French forces and pivot towards Russian-backed security solutions is a bold step towards self-sufficiency, one that has captured the attention of neighboring African nations. But this is not just about rejecting the West, it is about redefining the power dynamics in the region. For years, the Sahel has been caught in a cycle of foreign military intervention, often resulting in more violence and less stability. Burkina Faso's actions, led by Ibrahim Traoré, represent a rejection of that model and a willingness to experiment with new ways of securing the region. As more African nations begin to watch these developments, the question arises, can the Sahel succeed where the West has failed? The answer will determine not just the future of these countries, but the broader trajectory of African geopolitics. The consequences of the Sahel's realignment are not limited to the three countries at the forefront of this shift: Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. These changes have broader implications for the entire African continent and could reshape the geopolitics of the region in profound ways. For decades, the Sahel has been a battleground where foreign powers, particularly France and the United States, have competed for influence, using military interventions and economic aid as tools of control. The rejection of these forces marks a pivotal moment in African history, where the continent asserts its right to shape its future without external interference. Burkina Faso's decision to expel French forces and seek partnerships with Russia has sparked a ripple effect across Africa. Other nations, especially in the Sahel and beyond, are watching closely. Countries such as Chad, the Central African Republic, and even Algeria are re-evaluating their relationships with the West, considering whether they too might take a page from Burkina Faso's playbook. This trend is not just about a rejection of foreign military forces. It is about a larger shift in how African nations view their own sovereignty and agency on the global stage. The West, particularly France, has already responded with warnings of potential instability and violence in the region. Critics of the Sahel's new direction argue that these countries are simply replacing one form of dependency with another. The influx of Russian mercenaries and military support raises concerns that the region is trading one foreign power for another, with Russia's economic interests, particularly in uranium and gold mining, at the forefront. These countries may find themselves bound by new economic dependencies that could undermine their autonomy in the long run. However, for the governments of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, this is a risk they are willing to take. The Western-backed model of intervention has not delivered the promised stability or prosperity, and they are now looking for alternatives. By aligning with Russia, these nations hope to achieve greater self-sufficiency, not just in terms of military power, but in terms of economic development as well. Russia's willingness to provide military support without political strings attached has been a major factor in this realignment. This marks a stark contrast to Western aid, which often comes with conditions that many African nations see as neocolonial. The real consequences of these shifts will not be immediately apparent. The situation in the Sahel is still volatile, and the countries involved face significant security challenges. The rise of insurgent groups, local power struggles, and the ongoing battle for control over valuable resources like uranium, gold, and oil all pose threats to the region's stability. Moreover, the presence of Russian mercenaries raises concerns about the potential for human rights violations, as seen in other parts of Africa where Russian-backed groups operate. Yet, despite the risks, the Sahel's path toward greater autonomy is a statement of defiance against a system that has kept African nations in a subordinate position for too long. If successful, it will serve as a powerful example for other nations that are tired of being caught in the web of foreign intervention. The region is moving toward a future where its leaders and people have more control over their own destinies. This shift may not be easy, and it may come with significant challenges, but it is a step toward a new era in African geopolitics, one where the Sahel leads the charge. The future of the Sahel hinges on the next few years, and 3 potential scenarios could emerge, each with distinct implications for the region. The decisions made in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger will not only shape their own destinies, but will have far-reaching effects on the broader African continent and global geopolitics. Dans un scénario de base, le Sahel parvient à stabiliser sa sécurité en affirmant sa souveraineté. Avec un soutien continu de la Russie et d'autres alliés non occidentaux, ces pays construisent des infrastructures de sécurité plus autonomes et moins dépendantes des puissances militaires étrangères. La menace des insurgés diminue progressivement à mesure que les forces locales, formées et équipées par leurs nouveaux partenaires, reprennent du terrain. La région gagne en stabilité politique et les gouvernements se recentrent sur le développement interne, notamment les infrastructures et la croissance économique. D'autres pays africains, inspirés par ce modèle, réévaluent leurs relations avec l'Occident et cherchent des partenariats plus équitables. Cela ouvre la voie à une nouvelle dynamique géopolitique, où les nations conduisent davantage leur propre destin, moins contraintes par l'influence des anciennes puissances coloniales. Dans un scénario optimiste, ce basculement catalyse non seulement la sécurité, mais aussi une forte accélération économique. L'implication de la Russie, combinée à une quête de souveraineté, apporte de nouvelles opportunités de croissance, notamment dans les secteurs miniers et énergétiques, où la région possède des ressources considérables. D'ici 2025, le Burkina Faso, le Mali et le Niger émergent comme des leaders régionaux, formant un bloc qui plaide pour l'unité africaine et une autodétermination plus affirmée sur la scène internationale. Des accords commerciaux avec des puissances non occidentales soutiennent le développement, tandis que des projets d'infrastructures financés par des sources alternatives améliorent la connectivité. Malgré des défis persistants, le Sahel devient un symbole de ce que des nations africaines peuvent accomplir en affirmant leur souveraineté, inspirant une nouvelle vague d'initiatives portée par l'Afrique. Dans un scénario défavorable, la rupture vers la souveraineté s'avère difficile à soutenir. Bien que l'expulsion des forces occidentales et l'alignement avec la Russie aient été perçus comme nécessaires, les défis du Sahel se révèlent trop lourds. L'insurrection continue de déstabiliser la région et les solutions de sécurité appuyées par la Russie ne parviennent pas à instaurer une paix durable. L'instabilité économique s'aggrave, alimentée par la corruption et une mauvaise gestion, tandis que les ressources restent largement sous-exploitées. À mesure que l'influence russe grandit, une partie des populations ressent la pression d'une nouvelle dépendance, où la région demeure liée à une puissance extérieure, cette fois Moscou. L'échec à bâtir une infrastructure solide et autosuffisante provoque la désillusion, et le Sahel reste une zone de conflit chronique avec peu de perspectives de paix. L'effet domino se fait sentir en Afrique, poussant certains voisins à reconsidérer leur stratégie sans pour autant trouver une alternative réellement viable. The Sahel's shift towards greater autonomy is a critical moment in African geopolitics. But beyond the headlines and diplomatic statements, the impact of these changes resonates deeply with the people living in the region. For the citizens of Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, this is not just a political maneuver, but a matter of survival and dignity. For too long, these countries have faced the burden of foreign military intervention, failed development aid, and instability perpetuated by outside forces. Now these nations are attempting to carve out a new future, one where their sovereignty is respected and their people have more control over their destinies. In this context, the decisions made by Ibrahim Traoré and his counterparts in Mali and Niger reflect a desire for something greater than political change. They reflect a yearning for a future where African nations no longer feel bound to external powers. The citizens of the Sahel have lived through decades of foreign intervention that often seemed more concerned with maintaining control than with addressing the needs of local populations. The bold moves to expel French forces and seek new alliances are about more than security. They are about restoring pride, ensuring a future where the Sahel's people have a say in their own fate. The stakes are high. If these countries can navigate the challenges ahead, they could provide a model for other African nations seeking to assert their independence. The message is clear. Africa is no longer willing to be a passive player in the global order. As the world watches, the Sahel's experiment in sovereignty offers hope to those who believe in the potential of an independent and self-sufficient Africa. The path to lasting stability in the Sahel requires a clear roadmap, one that balances self-sufficiency with pragmatic alliances, addresses security concerns, and fosters economic growth. For Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the first step in this journey is securing their sovereignty. The expulsion of foreign forces and the pivot towards new strategic partnerships with Russia are significant milestones, but they are only the beginning. To truly establish a self-sustaining future, these nations must develop their own security infrastructures. This includes training and equipping local forces to combat insurgency, strengthening intelligence networks, and creating a robust military-industrial base that is not dependent on foreign powers. Secondly, economic development must be at the forefront of this strategy. The Sahel is rich in natural resources, uranium, gold, and oil, yet it has long been exploited by foreign powers. To break this cycle, the governments of the Sahel must negotiate fairer trade deals and encourage local industries to flourish. They must also focus on infrastructure projects that enhance connectivity within the region and improve access to markets. Partnerships with non-Western powers like Russia, which are offering support without the political strings attached, provide a unique opportunity to build a more equitable and sustainable economy. Lastly, these countries must focus on governance and stability. While the path to autonomy has been marked by bold political actions, true stability requires the development of strong institutions that prioritize the needs of the people. This includes combating corruption, fostering inclusive political systems, and ensuring that economic benefits are distributed equitably. The roadmap for the Sahel is clear: sovereignty, self-sufficiency, and sustainable development. If these countries can successfully implement this plan, they will not only reshape their own futures, but provide a blueprint for other African nations seeking to assert their independence in a rapidly changing world. Ibrahim Traoré's leadership represents more than just a political shift in Burkina Faso. It is a symbolic break from the past. For decades, the Sahel has been shaped by foreign powers that imposed their own agendas on the region. Now, with Traoré at the helm, Burkina Faso is taking control of its own narrative. This moment, while rooted in political and military decisions, is also a call for dignity and sovereignty that resonates far beyond the borders of the Sahel. The path ahead is fraught with uncertainty, but the desire for independence is clear and the stakes couldn't be higher. If Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger succeed in their quest for self-sufficiency, they will have demonstrated that sovereignty is not a distant dream, but a real, achievable goal for Africa. The message is simple yet profound. Africa has the power to shape its own future. As the world watches, Ibrahim Traoré and his counterparts in Mali and Niger are not just fighting for their countries, they are fighting for the future of a continent long held back by external forces. The Sahel's journey towards independence is only beginning, but it has already set in motion a movement that could transform Africa's role on the global stage. The story of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger is one of resilience, courage, and a deep desire for change. As these countries break free from the constraints of foreign control, they are not only defining their own futures but also challenging the global order. The world is watching as the Sahel experiments with new forms of governance and security, and the outcome will have ripple effects across Africa and beyond. The message of this movement is clear. African nations are ready to take their destinies into their own hands. Whether or not this journey leads to stability or chaos remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. The era of unquestioned foreign dominance in Africa is coming to an end. As we follow the unfolding events in the Sahel, the question we must ask ourselves is, what does the future hold for Africa? Will this new path be the beginning of a new era of African sovereignty? Or will the continent remain trapped in the cycle of dependence? The answer lies in the actions of these nations and the choices they make in the coming months and years.